In this video, I'm asking 5 highly qualified experts one of the most important questions in fitness. How hard should we train?
In today's video, I'm going to be doing a reaction video to Jeff Nippards' How Hard Should You Train to Build Muscle? In his video, he interviews 5 different fitness experts on the question of how hard should you really train in order to build muscle. I really like this video. I find that it has a lot of really good points, and I want to put my own points to it and talk about my feelings about this video. Let's get to it.
RPE stands for rating of perceived exertion, and it basically just ranks how hard a set was on a scale of 1 to 10. So an RPE of 10 means you had 0 reps in reserve, an RPE of 9 means you could have got 1 more rep if you pushed it all the way to failure, and so on. And then RIR stands for reps in reserve, and it's basically the inverse of RPE. So a 0 RIR means you had 0 reps in reserve, and that would be the same as saying RPE 10. An RIR of 1 is the same as RPE 9, and so on.
So I really like this part here where Jeff talks about what RPE and RIR are. I've heard both of these terms before, but I've never seen them used in the inverse like that. I thought that was just a really good explanation for somebody who's maybe never seen those terms before. And I think it's a good base of knowledge going into this video.
A lot of folks will say you got to train hard enough to make gains, and that's true. That's true as far as it goes, but it doesn't go far enough. I think we could do a little bit better. We can say you have to train hard enough to make gains, but not so hard that your next workout suffers and it becomes a situation where your next workout is unable to make you gains because you went too hard.
I really like how Dr. Mike puts this here of you got to train hard enough to build muscle, but not so hard that it impedes your next workout. I think a lot of times people train on either end of the spectrum. They either train so hard that they're always injured and they're always broken and they're never recovered for their next workout because they're just maxing out every set all the time. Or people don't train hard enough where they're, they think they're an RPE 7, really they're like an RPE 4 and RPE 5, and they're leaving more reps in the tank than they need to build muscle. So I like how he puts this here. It's that good middle ground of training hard enough to build muscle and, not training too light, but also not training so hard that you either A, get injured, or B, aren't recovered for your next workout.
When you start training, I think we all realize that you don't have to kill yourself. You don't need to take sets to failure. You don't need a crazy high amount of volume. Just by learning proper form, you just continue to get stronger and stronger. You make nice little incremental increases in strength. But that only take you so far. Wouldn't it be great if that's how training was all the time? You could just kind of add 10 pounds on the bar for the rest of your life. And then by the time you're 60 years old, you could bench 1,200 pounds. But that's just not how it works.
I really like John's explanation here of the difference between training for beginners, intermediates, and advanced. For beginners, you never have to train to failure in order to build muscle. You're going to build muscle just by simply working on your form and technique and performing lifts with proper form and technique week to week, slowly adding 5 to 10 pounds every single week as you can maintain proper form doing so.
So you kind of move into an intermediate stage where it's like, okay, now I feel most of these movements pretty good. It's not as easy to get as strong now. Now I'm going to add a little bit of volume. I'm going to add a little bit of intensity. The primary goal with that phase, I think, is still trying to get a little bit stronger, though. It's just because you've kind of went out of that newbie gain phase, it doesn't mean all of a sudden now you don't care about progressing your lifts. You get to this advanced stage, now all of a sudden you've got to challenge your body more.
So now as you progress from beginner into intermediate, you've been lifting, for 3 to 6 months, maybe a year. Now you got to start pushing yourself closer to failure or to failure more often and training a little bit harder, getting a little bit stronger in order to build muscle. It would be nice if you could just keep adding weight onto the bar every single week like you're a beginner, but eventually you're going to reach a point where that's maybe not the best way to go about things. So a common way that I like to counteract that is I like to break programs up into 4 3-week blocks, and in those 3-week blocks I'll have a certain rep range and I'll track what the most weight I've hit for that rep range is. And every time I come back to that, I look to hit a PR. So you're PRing every week, but you're not doing it at the same rep range. It's not like, okay, I'm hitting a new PR for 10 reps this week and next week and next week. It's like, hey, At the end of this 3-week block, I'm hitting a rep PR for 10 reps. At the end of the next block, I'm hitting a rep PR for 8 reps. At the end of the next block, I'm hitting a rep PR for 5 reps.
So from my own experience, what I've seen is that the best people in the game, like great accomplishments and great athletes, come from working obsessively. Like, you don't achieve greatness from casual effort. You know, never once in my entire career did I come into the gym thinking about what's the least I can do to like get by. For the most part, and this is based on what I've observed, people rarely train hard enough, and they're usually in what I call the 50% zone, where they don't take themselves to like, not failure, but like to an intensity that is actually challenging, rarely, and then they don't rest when they're supposed to rest.
I really like what Steffi Cohen has to say here. If you guys don't know who Steffi Cohen is, she is one of the greatest female powerlifters on the planet, and this is a really, really good point about mentality. I like what she said about how people rarely train hard enough. This kind of backs up what I was saying earlier in the video, is people rarely train anywhere close to failure. They think they're training way, way harder than they are, and when they actually break down to it and figure out that they're not training hard enough, they actually start making gains. So a lot of people will be like, oh, well, I'm not making gains, I don't know why. And then you go look at their effort in the gym, and you know, they're doing the same weight week to week. They're leaving reps in the tank. They rarely get close to failure. So this is a great point on, if you want to be the best, you have to push yourself like you want to be the best. If you want to build muscle, you actually have to work hard in the gym, push yourself close to failure, and do it in a smart way. You know, she also mentioned you have to rest when you need to rest. That's also a huge part of it. It's, you know, training hard enough that you need the rest, but also taking your rest and recovery serious enough that you don't injure yourself and that you're fully recovering so that you can continue to push yourself harder.
This is, I would say, one of the few constants in hypertrophy training. If you are not registering an RPE of like 6 or higher most of the time, you're probably not going to be growing very effectively. It has to be reasonably close to failure, or reasonably heavy, which kind of forces you close to failure immediately, and then do a lot of sets to compromise for the fact you're doing low reps. So on a per set basis for hypertrophy, it should probably be challenging for your work sets, somewhere in the range of like a 5 to 10 RPE, depending on what your current goal is. Most of the time we're talking like, you know, 6, 7, 8, 9 kind of thing.
So this is a great recap here by Eric. You know, in order to build muscle, you need to be training somewhere near failure. And I like what he said here, that you can build muscle doing lower repetitions, but in order to get enough volume to make it worth your while, you have to do a lot of sets. So strength training is definitely less efficient for building muscle, but that's not to say that when you're doing those lower repetitions, singles, doubles, triples, sets of 4, that you can't still build muscle. However, it is more efficient to get into that 8 to 12 rep range and then take those sets somewhere near failure. Like he said here, you know, so RPE of somewhere between 6 to 10, most likely in that 7, 8, 9 rep range. You know, when you go to absolute failure, your likelihood of injuring yourself or impeding your next workout goes up. So you should save RPE 10s or failure training till right before a deload week. However, you can still build really good muscle, leaving 3 reps, 2 reps, 1 rep in the tank, and you're going to recover way better from it. Just make sure that you're actually training hard enough to get into those RPE rep ranges.
So it really depends on the lifter, the exercise, and what you're hoping to accomplish. And you can look at it kind of from 2 different perspectives, both how hard should you push each set, and also kind of how much training volume should you be doing. So I'm going to start with the former. For pure hypertrophy training, I think your best bet is generally to be pretty close to failure. So for lifts like squats or deadlifts where form breakdown could cause issues, I think it's worth terminating a set at the point of technical breakdown. For lifts like rows, where you can get way more reps if you allow for the use of momentum, I think it's generally worth terminating a set when you're no longer feeling the movement in the muscles you're specifically trying to target. So, if rows become more biceps and lower back than lats, that's probably when you want to cut it off. Otherwise, I think you should generally be within 2 or so reps of concentric failure. So that's for hypertrophy. For strength work, I think there's value in doing sets near failure so you get comfortable grinding, but I also think there's value in doing a bunch of lower stress sets with 3 or more reps in reserve in order to practice skills and perfect motor patterns.
So I like how Greg talks here about the difference in exercises. I think this is something that people don't talk about very often. The safer an exercise is, the safer it will be to take it to failure. On something like a squat or a deadlift or a bench press, especially with without a spotter, taking it to failure could end up resulting in a very serious injury. But something like a machine bicep curl, you could take that set right to failure and your risk is very little to none on that exercise. So that's another thing to consider when you're programming failure sets into your program, is what is this movement and is it safe for me to take it to failure? On something like a squat, it might be safer to just keep it to RPE 9 and stop one set short of failure. Whereas something like let's say dumbbell lateral raise, that might be something that you take completely to failure if you can do so without creating any pain or injuries within yourself.
This video, I spent about an hour speaking to each of these people about how hard you should train, and because there was so much amazing info, including a lot of stuff that sort of went off topic, I decided I'm going to upload the full-length conversation with each guest to my podcast, which I'll link down below.
I would like to thank Jeff for doing this video and putting these different professionals together. Jeff does a really good job of taking some of the industry's best and maybe lesser known in the YouTube space's fitness professionals and doing really good interviews with them. So if you're somebody who really likes podcasts, I strongly suggest going and listening to Jeff's podcast of his interviews with these people. So far, he's only released the first 2 of them. I've listened to both of them and I've learned a ton about how to train to better build muscle. So so check him out. Like, share, and subscribe to see more reaction videos like this, as well as my exercise blogs and educational videos I'm putting out myself.